Welcome to the League of Women Voters of California's webinar on housing and homelessness through a racial equity lens. I'm Adriana Champagne-Zamora. I'm the League's Trudy Schaefer Public Policy Fellow. Now I will get on to hearing from our incredible speakers this evening. If you think of any questions as they are going through their presentations, please enter them to the Q&A section on Zoom. We'll go over them at the end of the webinar. And welcome to the webinar. Tamika Moss is the founder and CEO of All Home. She is locally and nationally recognized as a dynamic and gifted leader in the fields of housing and homelessness, public policy, and community development. Thank you, Tamika.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm super excited to be a part of this important conversation. Thank you to the League for setting us up, and I'm excited to be in conversation with my colleagues on this panel. As Adriana said, my name is Tamika Moss, and I started All Home about 4 years ago, really thinking about how we could bring regional solutions. And in this case, we serve the 9-county Bay Area, breaking down some of those the silos and bringing sectors together to really think about how do we serve people who are experiencing homelessness, who are housing insecure, financially insecure, and bringing regional solutions to our region's biggest problems. So that's why I started this organization. I've been working on social justice issues for the last 2 decades across the Bay Area. And this was sort of a culmination of recognizing how, in fact, no one jurisdiction, no one stakeholder can really address homelessness by themselves. We need to attack this challenge at the regional level. Next slide, Jaleesa, thank you. And the way that we do our work is really through convening, we co-create, we fund, we really think about how do we help local jurisdictions, people with lived experiences, our policymakers, how do we bring all of those stakeholders together to really not just talk about the problem, but to do something about it. And those are the methods in which we try to address this problem, which is why I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation. We do policy and advocacy work. We really work deeply with jurisdictions all across the region to help address these issues. And at the root of the work that we do at All Home is redressing the racial disparities that exist for those experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. And I just wanted to kind of start out by talking about the historical redlining and today's housing landscape. Racial inequities in homelessness and housing are not a coincidence, nor are they accidental. And what we have to confront if we're going to really ensure that racial equity is a part of how our communities move forward and move out of poverty and homelessness, we have to recognize the system's impacts that created these challenges in the first place. And I often say we have to attack the systems that perpetuate racial discrimination and housing discrimination at the same level of resources, intention, political will as which they were designed. Right? Many people say these systems were designed to operate exactly the way that they are operating today. And I think that that's a really important piece. On the left side is a historical redlining map. And you'll hear from my colleagues this term redlining. Of course, it is where it was state-sanctioned discrimination for people of color, primarily Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks from being able to purchase homes in certain communities, neighborhoods, and communities around this country. And on the right side is an Urban Institute tool that shows an index of factors by census tract. The darker blue shows the census tracts with the higher shares of people of color, more renter-occupied housing, more folks severely cost-burdened, higher unemployment. And you can also layer almost identical maps that show higher rates of asthma and chronic health conditions. So I thought it was important to start with this so that we can see just how these historical discriminatory practices show up in our communities today. Next slide, please. And I think, again, it's really important for us to understand who, in fact, are being impacted by this challenge. We hear it a lot as a data point, but when you think about who actually is in our communities and how we respond to these racial disparities, this is a really stark reminder of what we're talking about. Black Californians are disproportionately represented in our homelessness population. That is, every jurisdiction in the state has a disproportionate impact for Black Californians. In the 9-county Bay Area, we see the overrepresentation is 5x compared to the percentage of us who are in the general population. And our Indigenous brothers and sisters are even more impacted because their general population size is even smaller. So I feel like it's really important for us to know exactly what the scale of the challenge is if we're going to put forward solutions to disrupt the conditions that are fostering these kinds of discrepancies in the first place. When we talk a little bit about the structural drivers, you'll probably hear this, I feel like our work is a land of acronyms and these obscure terms that people don't really care about, and systems change and structures. Structural challenges is one of those. But we think about this as there are 5 key drivers of racial inequities that exist as we try to combat homelessness and housing insecurity. The first is really economic inequality and a lack of economic mobility for Black and Brown people in our community. We have a lot of our brothers and sisters who are in the services sector who do not have pathways for competitive family sustaining employment. And that is a national challenge, but it shows up really dramatically in high cost housing regions like the Bay Area, where your housing costs continue to skyrocket in every place in the Bay Area, and yet incomes and wages remain flat or decline, particularly during the pandemic. So income inequality is a key driver to the racial inequities that we're seeing in our communities. Another, and you'll hear more from my colleagues on this, another is our underlying racial wealth gap. And I'll show you in a moment a little bit more about that. But because housing has been the way in which Americans has secured wealth in this country, and Black folks in particular, people of color in general, did not have the same access to housing assets, that wealth gap has only gotten worse. And so we have to understand the racialized nature of that economic driver as well. The other is a really significant lack of affordable housing. Particularly for extremely low income households in our region. And when we say extremely low income households, these are households who are earning 0 to 30% of the area median income. And that changes a bit across the region, but the average is about $18,000 a year that folks are earning in order to meet housing burdens that exceed that by more than 100%. So we're really talking about how do we bring more deeply affordable housing to the market if we're going to address homelessness and housing insecurity. And then the last two are really talking about anti-Black housing policies exclusively, because again, if you can, as you look on this chart, you see that 5x impact. Redlining and exclusionary zoning and all of those things, I know people think are in our past, but their remnants continue to impact where people are able to live today, the assets in which they have to purchase homes, to pay their rent. All of those historical practices still have tentacles that are impacting people's lives today. And lastly, the exposure to child welfare and our criminal justice systems. These are the structural elements that keep us in this steady state of crisis in our communities of color, particularly for Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And so it's important to ensure that when we're talking about racial inequities with regard to homelessness and housing, that we remember that these are about the structures and the systems that are in place today. Next slide, please. I wanted to just kind of highlight what kind of housing is actually being built across our region. So we have a regional housing needs allocation that is administered every 8 years in the Bay Area. It's administered through another acronym, through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the ABAG, our Bay Area Association of Governments, that put forward what the housing needs are at each income level in communities across the region. And each community is responsible for developing those housing targets. And as you can see, what typically gets built are the higher income, higher market rate units. Where you see an underinvestment is in that deeply affordable housing that I was just mentioning, particularly for extremely low income households. So these are folks who are earning, as I said, if they're lucky, $35,000 a year. Minimum wage in many of our jurisdictions are, $15 an hour. 2 minimum wage earners could pay $1,400 a month. They can't pay $3,200 a month, which is the going rate for a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco, for example. So we want to just highlight the importance here of having jurisdictions be responsible for producing those deeply affordable units, just as they're producing the higher market units, because there are over 1 million people in that extremely low income category that need housing that they can afford. And that's across the 9-county Bay Area. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this slide, because I know that my colleagues will go into greater detail, but that wealth gap is really profound when you talk about what assets people actually have to ensure their housing and economic security for their families. And this just reflects the disproportionality by race. So I'll move to the next slide, but just wanted to make sure that folks understood just how significant it is when you're not carrying on that generational wealth and didn't have access to it, particularly through housing. Next slide, please. And I wanted, as you can see, each of these is kind of going into our structural barriers, and this one is really important. The incarceration that contributes to long-term housing insecurity. In the last 3 decades, we've had a substantial increase in incarceration due to mandatory sentencing, right? And we know that it has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown people. And in California, just to give you a reference point, African Americans, Black folks constitute just under 6% of the state residents in California, but 28% of people in prison. And we know that once folks come out of prison, their exposure to housing insecurity and homelessness is 7 times higher than the general public. And so we have to really be thinking about the barriers to employment for our brothers and sisters who are reentering community, thinking about the exclusionary practices in subsidized housing that doesn't allow formerly incarcerated people to live in subsidized housing, as an example. So all of these elements that facilitate that vulnerability for our communities are things that we really have to address if we're going to address the racial inequities that exist. There are a few more slides I just want to run through quickly so I can pass the baton to my colleagues here. We really believe in bringing all members of our community to the table in order to solve these kinds of challenges. So we have a regional impact council of stakeholders across every sector, folks with lived experience, our business leaders, philanthropic leaders, and we've really worked over the last 3 years to develop 2 significant bodies of work. One is aimed at unsheltered homelessness. How do we reduce unsheltered homelessness significantly across our region so that we can bring our brothers and sisters inside, help them heal, and transition into permanent housing? And then the second plan, which we just released today, is around the upstream big moves, we call it, but the upstream barriers and impacts that keep homelessness and poverty in place. And those two plans together, we think, gives the region a chance to really address some of these systemic challenges focused on racial equity and making sure that all of the stakeholders in the ecosystem can help us improve our outcomes when it comes to homelessness and housing insecurity. So I'll pause there and pass it back to Adriana.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tamika. That was so interesting. I really appreciate that. Next up, we will have Stephen Menendian, who is the Assistant Director and Director of Research at the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley, where he supervises many of the Institute's research projects and ongoing initiatives. His primary areas of expertise are structural racism, civil rights, fair housing, spatial inequality, affirmative action, and educational equity. Thank you so much, Stephen. I'll let you get started.
Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Tamika. Can everyone see my slide, my cover slide?
Yes.
Okay. So the title I've stolen from the title of this panel, Housing and Homelessness Through a Racial Equity Lens. So I'm going to try and build on what's been said, but also really focus on this thematic. So in order to do that, let me begin by trying to define racial equity. I found that in advocacy circles, in community organizing circles, even in academic and scholarly circles, we use terms like social justice, racial justice, housing equity, housing justice, racial equity, without necessarily meaning the same thing when we use those terms. And in fact, sometimes there's kind of a deliberate vagueness or abstraction to it that makes it actually difficult for us when we're talking about prescriptions and solutions to be really clear in what it is we mean. So I want to show my cards. I want to explain exactly what I mean by this. So in general, the main difference between equity and equality is that equality is focused on inputs or treatment, whereas equity is focused on outcomes. And I don't have time to talk about the origin of this term. And of course, there's many different uses of the word equity. Equity can refer to wealth. It can there's legal concepts. But in this context, in the racial justice context, mostly what we're talking about and the origin of it is in the school funding fights in the states. And these fights really erupted in the 70s when the United States Supreme Court said that disparities in funding between districts did not violate the United States Constitution. So advocates, school equity advocates, began fighting in state court under state constitutions. And this is where equity really comes into its own. And so equity, both in its origin point in racial justice and social justice fights, and also contemporarily, really focuses on outcomes as opposed to just treating people the same. And so it's more than that too. We also don't look at individual treatment. Equity is looking at groups rather than individuals. And so I could have put these images into the slide deck, but they're so famous, I figure most of you have probably seen them. These fence ballpark tree images. So if you just Google equity imagery, you'll see a lot of these. The most famous ones are people standing behind a fence at a baseball game. And some people are too short to see beyond the fence or see the game. So some people have a step ladder. And there's all sorts of iterations of these. The idea basically being that if you just treat people the same, you'll have different unequal outcomes. Another series of images that you may have seen are the ones where people are reaching for an apple on a tree. And the same idea, right? Some people get a step ladder, some people are taller. And there's a whole bunch of critiques and counter critiques of these images. So I didn't want to show you one and then get into all of that. But the basic idea of equity is that you're looking at outcomes, not just between individuals, but between groups, which means that at its essence, in my opinion, we're talking about disparities by race and how we might reduce them, often in a structural sense, not by simply treating people different, but by changing the systems and structures in which they operate. So in all of these images, some of the suggestions are, let's remove the fence, or let's lower the tree, or whatever the case may be, without merely having to respond on an individual and case-by-case basis. So what I mean by racial equity is very simply this: reducing intergroup disparities by race, right? However we need to do that, with an emphasis on remedies that are structural rather than individual. I hope that's clear. So obviously the focus of this conversation today is on housing. So I'm going to talk about some of the disparities, the massive disparities in housing with respect to race. Let's start with the homeownership rates. So you can get homeownership data from the Federal Reserve. The St. Louis Fed reports this on a quarterly basis. I think actually the most recent data is from Q3, but it's basically the same. It's very little change from this slide. So here is Q4, meaning this is October, November, and December of 2021. And these are national US homeownership rates by race. So the overall percentage of households that own their own home in the country, from Maine to California to Alaska to Hawaii, is 65.5%. The percentage of white households that own their own home is 74.4%. So basically 3/4 of white households own their own home. You'll notice that the percentage of Black households that own their own home in the country is 44%. This is a 30-point disparity. And something that's important to note is that this disparity has actually gotten worse over time, not better. And again, the reason I'm talking about this disparity is because, in my opinion, racial equity is about reducing group-based disparities by race, regardless of their cause, frankly, and with an emphasis on structural interventions. So here's what I want to draw your attention to. Look at 1970. 1970 is the year that the Federal Fair Housing Act goes into effect. So the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 says that homeowners nowhere in the country are allowed to discriminate against people on the basis of race in rental, sale, or leasing of housing. You'll notice that the homeownership rate for white people in 1970 is 66%, and for Black people is 42%. That is a 24-point disparity. The disparity is now 6 points larger. And it's mostly driven by the fact that white rates of homeownership have grown much larger. Now, these data points, they oscillate over time. The Black rate of homeownership actually peaked just before the subprime crisis in about 2006, 2007, almost 49%. So these decennial intervals mask the peaks and the valleys. But the main point, is that the disparity of 30 points is larger than it has been at any point in the post-war period. This is a larger disparity. And so this is just a chart from the National Community Reinvestment Coalition that shows the trends over time in a similar manner. And I also have data here from California. So California obviously has much more expensive housing than almost anywhere in the country. The median price of a home in California is almost double that of the country at large and in many states. What you'll see here is that as of 2019, the percentage of Californians that own their own home is 55%, white Californians 63%, Black Californians 36%. So this is a 27-point disparity. Now it's obviously smaller than the national disparity, but the disparity in 1970 was only 17-point difference, which means that although the magnitude of the disparity is smaller in California than it is in the country at large, the increase in the disparity is much larger over that 50-year period. This is very disturbing. And then this obviously has a large impact on the racial wealth gap. Now, unlike the homeownership rate, the racial wealth gap is not consistently, the data sources for this are not panel-based. They're not a complete survey. What it is the Federal Reserve has a consumer finance survey that has different samplings, and it's a much smaller sample. The data is just not quite as consistent and reliable, but it's also reported not on a quarterly basis, but on a biannual basis. I'm getting too much in the weeds here. Basically, what I want to show you is this. In 2016, the average, not the median, but the average Black household's net worth was about $138,000. while the average white household was about $930,000. So this is a disparity of 7 times. This, by the way, this figure includes home equity. If you take out home equity and you look at the median instead of average, the figures are in some ways worse. So in this case, the typical white family has a wealth in 2016 of $171,000 versus the typical black family of $17,000. And then again, if you take out housing, the figures become much smaller. Here's the point, without confusing you. Let me just show you this chart. I put together this chart earlier this year. In 2019, if you're just looking at median wealth, which includes home values, the white to black home ratio is 188 to $24,000. That's a ratio disparity of 8. Now, and that's, Tamika had this figure of basically 8 to 9 white to black wealth. But if you go back to 2009, right when the housing crash happened, the disparity was actually 45 times. So that white wealth was 45 times that of black wealth. So obviously 8 is much better than 45. The problem is, and this is where statistics begin to lie, is the disparity is much worse in 2019 than the ratio. So the ratio is only 8 to 1, but the absolute disparity is actually twice as large as it was in 2009. So this is really where statistics can deceive and mislead. You really want clear data. The point here is both in terms, you'll notice in terms of the homeownership rate, right? I said that the homeownership rate increased 2% from 1970 to 2020 for Black Americans, but the disparity has grown much larger between white and Black Americans. The exact same thing is true here, right? The absolute disparity in wealth is much larger, and this is in no small part driven by home equity in housing wealth. And then you can, again, there's 3 different measures of white and black wealth. You can get average, you can get median, and you can also include or exclude housing wealth. This is the median, and it includes housing wealth. Hopefully this is clear. The main takeaway here is that the white to the black wealth gap, the disparity in absolute terms is larger than it's ever been, even though the ratio has declined over time. Okay, now there are many other disparities in housing. There are disparities not just in terms of homeownership or in terms of wealth, but in terms of appraisals. There have been a lot in the news lately about disparities in appraisals, property tax assessments and delinquencies, loan access to credit application approvals or denials, segregation, discrimination, and steering, and much more. But what the focus of this conversation today is on homelessness. So I want to talk just 5 minutes and then I'll stop about homelessness. So unfortunately, unlike either the racial wealth information, employment, income, or homeownership, we don't actually have a federal agency that consistently and comprehensively collects data on homelessness. What we have often are sporadically reported and geographically narrow surveys on homelessness, counts. And so some of the major ones that have been conducted in the last, I would say 5 years, I'm going to share 2 of them, were a count of Oakland's homeless population, which found a 47% increase in homelessness between 2017 and 2019. This is before the pandemic. And that 47% of the county, Alameda County's homeless population was Black, even though the Black population was just 11% of the overall county population. Similar disparities are found in Los Angeles, where Black Angelenos are 6% of the population, but were found to be 30% of the homeless population. So you have very large disparities in almost every aspect of housing. I just got a notification that says participants can now see your application. So I hope you've seen these slides all the way through. Okay, so this is the point that I want to sort of leave with. Some say that to solve homelessness, we just need to build affordable housing. And there's a lot of, even the term affordable housing, I think, is ambiguous. Some people, when they're talking about affordable housing, are talking about not housing affordability, which means the median or even average price of a home, but they're talking about either the segment of the market that's available to very low income or very low wealth people. And this segment of the market is typically known as like starter homes or miniature homes, or, or subsidized housing, right? So like subsidized housing like LIHTC, or demand side subsidized housing like housing choice voucher housing stock. I think that we need to differentiate between housing affordability and deeply affordable housing, which Tamika spoke to, because they're not the same thing, right? If the median price of a home in California is $800,000, getting that to $600,000 or $650,000 or even $550,000 is not going to provide housing that's available to very low income people, which is why the RHNA methodology is so important. So I just want to say that I don't believe that simply creating affordable housing, even deeply affordable housing, is going to solve homelessness. Let me be really clear on what I mean by homelessness, by solving homelessness. I mean that basically we will get 90, 95 to 100% of people who are unsheltered into stable housing. And it is really unfair and unfortunate that homeless people are stigmatized on all sorts of reasons, having mental health issues or addiction issues or untreated trauma. But it is true that research shows that to solve homelessness, you can't just create affordable housing. You have to create what's called permanent supportive housing, PSH. And to be really effective, you have to couple it with managed care, healthcare services, all sorts of additional services. And so it's not just about affordable housing. I think that's misleading. I think if we created massive amounts of affordable housing, I think it could put a dent in homelessness. But in my opinion, it would in no meaningful sense solve homelessness, which is really my concern. How do we get every single person who is unsheltered shelter? That's the goal, not just 40%, 50%, 60%. So that's what I'm saying here. I'm going to stop there. And I would also just, actually, one other thing I just want to say is we need to decriminalize poverty and homelessness. Since 1990, 58 California cities have enacted hundreds of laws that target or disproportionately affect the homeless. Many of these are vagrancy arrests, and it's just really unfortunate that people confuse being homeless with disorder and crime, right? Being homeless is not a crime. And I think this is partly what affected Chesa Boudin's election. I think Chesa was the people in San Francisco who voted him out were upset not about crime, but about disorder and homelessness in San Francisco, and he got kicked out of office for that. I just think it's really unfortunate that we conflate those issues, and we need to roll back these laws that criminalize poverty. So I'm going to stop there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was so chock full of information. That was so interesting. Next up is Narena Limon. She is a fellow with the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley. She most recently was the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Industry Relations at the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. And I will leave it off to you, Narena.
Thank you so much. First of all, Adriana, thank you so much for inviting me. Is my camera not on? Hold on a second. Okay, I'm back on. Thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much for prompting this important conversation. I do want to start off this conversation. So first of all, I most recently was led the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals Policy and Research Department. And the organization was strictly focused on increasing the Latino homeownership rate as a means to bridge the wealth gap. So as part of my job there, I was the author of the State of Hispanic Homeownership Report, which is an annual report that tracks the trends in Latino homeownership. So a lot of the data that I'll share today will be from those reports and that research, so will be a little bit Latino focused, but want to emphasize that this is a broader conversation about the racial and ethnic wealth gaps and how they're impacting our U.S. economy. So With that said, we can't have a conversation in California about housing without having a conversation about its impact on BIPOC communities. The state of California is a minority state. It's a state where Latinos are the plurality of the state of California. To think about housing demand, that's often tracked by tracking the rate of household formations. And if you look at the Latino community alone, over the past decade, Latinos have accounted for over 75% of household formations. So when we talk about housing in California, from affordable housing to homeownership, we are talking about communities of color that we need to serve in order for the state of California to be a vibrant state, for the state to be economically viable for the foreseeable future. So with that said, want to bring us back to the fact that housing is a tool, it's an asset that often is associated with bridging the wealth gap, which is something that I'm going to be talking about a little bit more. I know that my previous panelists have already touched on that, so I'll try to go through that fast. But it's also a place where families come together. It's a place for healing. It is a place for grounding and stability, and it is really the nucleus for where community happens. And so housing is so much more than that. Those four walls, they're a place that nurture us, but at the same time, it is a place that make or break a person's economic mobility. So with that said, we spoke about the wealth gap earlier, and the implications therein. I'm not going to get into the numbers because we got into that earlier, but I just want to share this slide right here real quick that was put together by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. And you think about, some of the various variables that impact wealth. If we just look at education, which is another one of those, multiplier effects that have an impact on a person's ability to move through the economic ladder. Look at the distribution here between people of color and the white community, and you look that even at the highest levels of education, the disparities are probably the greatest. So the conversations around bridging the wealth gap is while education facilitates the ability for higher paying jobs, there is a big conversation here around assets. And as we talk about wealth, it is the accumulation of assets minus liabilities. And when we talk about the rising costs of colleges, all of this plays a role in how this perpetuates the wealth inequalities in this country. So with that said, if we look at the Latino community as a microcosm here on the wealth gap, the Latino median household wealth is around $36,000. That's compared to about $189,000 for the white population. So if we look at the wealth gap, it's about 153. That's the equity in. If we look at the differences between the two populations, between the Latino population and the white population, the wealth gap narrows when you're looking and you're comparing homeowner to homeowners. So talking about the pivotal role that homeownership plays in bridging the wealth gap, we need to also understand that homeownership has become more lucrative than ever. So people who own home have seen, for example, in June 2022, saw an 18.3% year over year home price appreciation with an average equity gain of $55,000, which is more than double the annual gain of 2020. So homeownership has become more lucrative than ever, but it's also become more exclusive than ever. And with that said, we find that, when looking at the Latino community, Latino homeowners have 28 times the wealth as Latino renters. That means that Latino households have been able to purchase a home, have a median household wealth of just over 170,000 compared to only 6,000 for renters. But like I said, homeownership has become out of reach for not only for many people of color, for many Californians, for our next generation, for millennials, Gen Zers, and the next generation that's coming in, that's doing everything right, going to school, saving money. But one of the biggest impediments of that is the housing inventory shortage that we have right now. And I'll get into that a little bit more and walk you through some of the experience that folks are going through as they approach their homeownership journey. So we talked a little bit about the homeownership gap earlier, and how large they remain. But I do want to play a role. We talked about the role that Latinos, for example, play in household formations in the nation. So if we're going to talk about a healthy economy, the real estate community, for example, depends on the Latino community to purchase, be a big share of the first-time homeowner population, mostly because of the age of the population. So Latinos have a median age of 30. So that is prime home buying years. So they're the youngest population in the country and are driving a lot of if you look at demographics alone and the age of the population, a healthy economy would mean that Latinos would be driving first-time home buyer market because that's where the population growth is happening. And if you look at the post-recession period of time, you saw that Latinos were actually driving that first-time home buyer market. However, in 2017, there was a major seismic shift that coincided around the time when housing inventory became tighter and tighter. And what's been happening is that individuals that are able to rely on generational wealth are better able to compete with the low housing inventory environment that individuals are going through. But if you look at the state of California, the Inland Empire remains a pivotal area that is where the most new Latino homeowners are coming from in the state of California, which when we think about, we talked about the Bay Area and the prices and affordability, but when we think about where people are moving to in order to be able to purchase their own homes, they're moving farther and farther and farther. We need to ensure that the infrastructure follows a lot of those first-time home buyers. And if we look at affordability, this map right here is really interesting because it lays out how much of an income is required to buy the median home in each of those markets. And what the median income is, median household income is, what we calculated was for the Latino community. And you see the massive discrepancies that there are in the greater Los Angeles area. And if you look at the state of California, you look at the massive discrepancies here, and you need about a 250,000 household income in order to be able to afford the median price home in San Francisco, about 149,000 in Los Angeles. And this is compared to a median income of about 66,700. So this is, two of the markets that are the top 10 markets seeing the highest price appreciation in the country are in California. So when individuals, given the fact that housing appreciation was happening at such steep rates, individuals that were going to compete to try to purchase a home were having a very hard time getting their offers accepted. So we know that BIPOC communities are twice as likely to use FHA financing, which has been a critical tool that's used for first-time home buyers. That for the past 50 decades or past period of time. But we know that individuals that were using FHA products were the most likely to get their offers rejected. So what we saw, we did surveys within the NARP members, and what NARP found was that individuals that had FHA loans didn't even get their offers considered. They weren't even looked at. So that means that individuals that were, were coming in with as cash buyers, as institutional investors, were beating out some of these first-time home buyers. Latinos were also 81% more likely to get denied a conventional loan than non-Latinos, making, and a lot of that was accounted to high debt to income ratios. So we talk about access to credit. We talk about that being compounded with low housing inventory. When we talk about now the rising interest rates, homeownership has become absolutely more exclusive than ever. I also want to talk about, in the past, in 2021, when we looked at CoreLogic data, the top 10 counties with the highest percentage of properties that sold over list price. I think this is really important to think about, because you think about first-time home buyers, those individuals that actually were able to get their offer accepted, they are only going to get financed up until the appraised value. So that means that anything, if they sell the house above appraised value, they're going to have to get that money and use that money out of pocket. So this is also, another thing that's exacerbating the affordability challenges. And we talk about affordable housing. I think Stephen brought up a really good point about the terminology and the nomenclature around affordable housing. Individuals, when we talk about affordable housing, we're not talking about affordable home ownership usually, and so it's important to also distinguish the fact that we have an affordability challenge across the board. And what are the solutions to all of this? We have, right now we have a housing inventory shortage. We have incentives to build affordable housing. We're not building enough, but there aren't a lot of incentives. There aren't incentives to build entry-level housing. So that means that the entry-level housing, the small home, is the most underproduced home in the market today. So this is just stacking the odds against, just stacking the barriers one on top of the other for individuals that are seeking to become homeowners. And this is all going to exacerbate the wealth gap that we're talking about. And this has serious implications, not only on the future of the state of California, future of the country, it's a hard policy problem to solve. We could do land trust in order to, ensure that individuals are able to start building some wealth and enter their home ownership journey. But the truth of the matter is that even land trusts aren't able to have to reap the full benefits of market appreciation, which is what builds that equity. And so it's a double-edged sword. What are the programs that can be created? One of the things that we saw is that Freddie Mac did a calculation that there's currently 8.3 million Latinos under the age of 45 who are considered mortgage ready. They just can't purchase a home because there's no homes for sale. And they can't buy what's not for sale. And this first-time home buyer market can't buy what's not for sale. And so, down payment assistance programs are incredibly important. But when we're dealing with individuals that are going and competing for homes, and they're competing against 15, 20, 30, 40 people, it's the individuals that are going to be the cash buyers that are going to get the home. And so unless we build more of that housing stock, that entry-level housing stock, we're going to be far away from addressing some of these homeownership disparities. So I know that there's questions, and I've talked a while, so I'm going to stop right here.
Thank you so much, Janet. That graph was very stunning, because that's 3 of those counties are Bay Area counties, which is not very surprising. I will have us dive into the Q&A. If you have a question for our speakers, please type it into the Q&A chat now, and I'll read them aloud. We do only have about 8 minutes or so, so there might be some that are unanswered, just to give you guys a heads up. The first one is, what are your proposals to improve safety, sanitation, and trash collection in camps of the unhoused? If anyone has an answer to that, also, it's totally fine if that's not anyone's specialty.
Well, maybe I'll take a stab at that question. First of all, I think, you know, my goal is to move those folks out of the encampments and into interim housing so that we're not using the streets as a waiting room for people to get into permanent housing. There are many jurisdictions across the region who are investing in modular units, there are cabin communities. There are myriad of ways for us to create more interim dwellings that people can come in, get the services and supports that they need while we provide navigation services to help people find housing in the community. So the first is we need to bring folks off the streets as quickly as we can into interim options and or permanent housing, whatever that is, but really focusing on that. There's also resources at the state level for encampment management that many jurisdictions across the state are utilizing to provide those emergency services that the participant asked us about. And so it really, I use the metaphor a lot around the emergency room. We have to keep people from dying on our streets, and those emergency services are critical. And it is not sustainable for us to leave our brothers and sisters outside while we build the housing that we've been talking about today. We have to do simultaneous investments in interim housing, permanent housing. And I think Stephen talked about this, prevention. When I ran Hamilton Families, which was an organization focused on family homelessness, for every family I housed, 3 more families would become homeless during the same period of time because of those structural barriers we've been talking about. So we have to do simultaneous investments in those solutions if we're going to address our encampments with urgency.
Thank you so much, Tamika, for answering that. Same part of the same question that Paul asked is, what are your proposals to help owners subdivide existing homes, which has historically been the main source of cheap rentals?
Well, I don't know that I agree with the premise. I think historically, the main source of cheap rentals has been what's called filtering. The filtering, let me just explain what it is and why it doesn't work today. So the concept of filtering is that as you build more and more housing stock, like you have an apartment building built in 1990, and another in 92, another in 94, and then another in 2000. The older stock, as it competes with the newer stock, the rents are supposed to be pushed downward. And you also have different segments of the market, right? So you have, penthouses, you have, depending on locations, places nearer to the water or parks tend to be more expensive. But the idea of filtering is that in a competitive housing market, older housing stock is supposed to filter down and become more affordable. The problem is that doesn't work anymore for 2 reasons. One is that in extremely hot markets, meaning where you have large employment growth, and the sort of like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, the opposite actually happens. It's called upgrading. So upgrading is where the landlords or the owners of housing will actually withdraw the housing from the low income segment and actually spend $20,000 to $50,000 to replace a few things, slapdash paint on it, and then they can sell it at the top of the market, rent it at top of the market, or sell it. So upgrading happens in hot markets. But the other problem that's happened with upgrading is that there has been a cultural turn where people actually prefer older housing for whatever reason. That wasn't the case 30 years ago. People were always looking for new housing. Now there's this preference for older housing, and it's not just a preference for older housing. People actually look down on new housing, like it's garish, ugly, or whatever. So this actually makes filtering less likely to happen. So I would dispute the premise. I don't even remember what the question is right now, but the point is that filtering was the traditional mechanism for creating affordable housing. The only other thing we really have to do is subsidize housing. You can do it demand side or supply side, like I said, right? You can demand side subsidies are like housing choice vouchers, formerly called Section 8. Supply side are things like LIHTC, which is the largest supply side mechanism for creating affordable housing.
I'm gonna also add to that. This is all part of the conversations around missing middle housing. And by the way, I'm having I personally don't like the term missing middle housing because people get confused on what missing middle means. Usually you think about it's middle income individuals, but we're talking about building homes that aren't single family homes, but also aren't high rises. And I think this is all part of the exciting work that's been done here in California to pass SB 9 and to pass some of the other zoning reform. I think right now is the time for us to analyze, what are the existing additional barriers that we need to overcome in order to ensure that individuals can subdivide their homes in order to create, to create more housing and to, smaller homes that could serve as entry-level housing. I think that's probably the best bet that we have right now. And it was an exciting legislative victory, I think, for housers in California. I think the goal now is implementation and understanding what's preventing individuals from actually subdividing their homes, and perhaps, what are the areas where, one of the things that I'm really excited about is I'm seeing organizations, for example, here, I live in San Diego, organizations like LISC San Diego purchase homes in more affluent neighborhoods and that have larger lots, and then subdividing the lot, and then selling those homes to first-time home buyers, which I think is really exciting, because if you leave it up to the free market, you're going to individuals that are the seller of the home is going to sell it to the highest bidder. But when you have a nonprofit entity that is actually choosing who the home is going to go to, like a first-time home buyer, I think that becomes really exciting.
Thank you, Narena and Stephen, for answering that question. We have 1 minute left. I was just going to pose one question to you that I really liked, which is, what are the best ways folks here can lend their voice in an advocacy space?
Maybe I'll be very quick. Say yes to housing. One of the biggest challenges we have is that a lot of California is zoned for single family homes, and it doesn't allow for multifamily or duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. All of the less affordable housing to construct is often not a part of the zoning. So say yes to housing. Go to your city council meetings, write to your boards of supervisors, encourage the production of housing. That is how we're going to solve part of this problem.
Become best friends with your city council members or board of supervisors. Have conversations with them. They are, I think that is the best way. They should know who you are. They should know how you feel about it. And we need to show up to city council meetings and board of supervisor meetings.
100% agree with both those points, but just also we need to embrace new housing and not look down on it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys all for those answers. So it looks like we are at time. That's our hour. Thank you all so much for joining us, and a big thanks to our speakers, especially for taking time out of your day to come talk to us. This discussion has been recorded too. We'll be sending it out to attendees this week and a follow-up email. And thank you all so much. That was so interesting.